Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Todd Clarke. I'm CEO of Conterra Consultants and Advisors, and today is my property tax update from the last 18 months of what we've learned in the property tax world. There's been a number of just astounding changes that have happened, and I appreciate your patience as I try to navigate my way through them. And I wanted to thank our friends at Greater Albuquerque Association of Realtors and Southwest MLS for inviting me today to give you all an update. If you want to download this document that I'm summarizing, it's a 20-page PDF file. The QR code for it is right here. If your My goals and objectives today is to cover the last half century of property taxes in New Mexico, to improve our knowledge of the latest changes that have happened in the last 18 months, and to advise our clients and friends and colleagues about what we should expect in 2026 going forward, mostly with a focus on commercial, apartment investments, and single family properties that are impacted by changes in classification for short-term rentals, and discuss some of the legislative solutions that are out there. If you don't know me, I'm a new Southwest MLS board member and director. Thank you for those of you who gave me your vote and entrusted me with your confidence to help that amazing group of people. I been in the business now 37 years in January. My family's been doing this for 102 years, four generations. Both my parents, both my uncles, my grandfather and my grandfather's uncle, and my wife and I have all been doing this a long time. My wife and I own a boutique firm. We specialize in apartment investment sales. We sell 2 units and up, and we've handled about 19,000 units across the state and getting really, really close to 1,000 units and about $916 million in total deal volume. Not many people know, though, we have a non-transactional real estate consulting firm. This is where we do teaching, development consulting for new developments, city, government, county, lenders, anybody who's looking to bring new housing online. And we also do property tax protests. And I've been doing those since I was a very young broker in the late 80s, early 90s, and have handled about $2.5 billion of property tax protests in that time period. We win about 98% of our cases with an average reduction of 23 to 25%. I've also authored a 360-page textbook on understanding New Mexico's property tax system and teach a 4 and 8 hour course. There is one coming up in January if you're interested. Also a CSIM instructor now of 28 years. I've taught in a dozen countries and most of the states in the United States to over 4,000 students. Proud to say I'm a founding member of the Commercial Association of Realtors, which we founded 30 years ago. This year, work in large partnership with the Apartment Association. I've been a past industry champion for them. And I'm ultimately a total data geek and policy wonk. I love solving the problems that occur at the intersection of people, place, and property. So enough about me. Let's talk about what's going on in the property tax world. And why did I choose 18 months? 18 months is how long it took for the new assessor who was elected a couple of years ago to get his feet underneath him and start applying the law evenly and in his belief fairly to all of the property owners. He indicated about 2 years ago, based on an LFC, Legislative Finance Committee report of about 30 or so pages, that commercial properties across the state were grossly undervalued. We're talking 30 to 40% of market value, and that he would need to bring those to current and correct unless the industry and the assessors and the county affiliates could work together to co-sponsor legislation. He was also, and that legislation was for commercial properties, if you're interested, was a no more than 12% increase every year over a 12-year period. And for multifamily properties, they would be assessed at about 60% of what they sold for. Simultaneously, short-term rentals were under the microscope for a pretty radical change of previous laws that really had not changed. And all of this is covered in a Legislative Finance Committee report, which you can find the hyperlink to if you download that 20-page document and that QR code I pointed out earlier, which will also be at the very end in the Q&A section. Unfortunately, despite NMAR and GAR and Carnum and NAIOP and the Apartment Association and everybody's valiant attempts on behalf of the real estate industry, we did not have success in the long 2024 session. The long 2025 session. except we got one good deed done, and that's House Memorial 52. Many of you may be scratching your heads like House Memorials, those don't mean anything. We could have a Todd Clarke Day in a House Memorial, and it carries no more weight than not having a Todd Clarke Day. Except in this case, it really did. So my hat's off to David and Josh and the group at the Governing Affairs Committee at the New Mexico Association of Realtors, and Carl Vidal at the New Mexico Short-Term Rental Association and his board for getting House Memorial 52 passed. But let's zip back in time, not 18 months, but 50 months. One of my favorite governors is Governor Bruce King. He served many terms. He was in the Roundhouse as a representative or senator prior to being a governor. And he wrote a fabulous book. If you ever want to understand how New Mexico politics used to work and how crazy it is, please read Cowboy in the Roundhouse, which is his autobiography. He, as it relates to property taxes, he mentions a number of things and how weird our state was and how it approached what it owned and how it handled things. And in this case, in those days, this is prior to 1970, your tax evaluation fluctuated with who might be in power. If your political party was in, that was one thing. If not, that was another. Your assessment was strictly up to the Tax Equalization Board, which consisted of county commissioners, the county assessor, an at-large Democrat, and an at-large Republican. If they wanted to assess a building at 10% of value, that's what they used. If they wanted to use 50%, that was it. Some counties, it ran all the way up to 90%. That's a nice way of saying political party and power and your political affiliation dictated what your property tax bill was. Talk about intrusive overreach of politics in your property tax bill. Governor King called a constitutional convention. They overhauled our property tax system, and we had a very fair and equitable system. And I cover this in the 4-hour course I teach called Understanding New Mexico's Property Tax System, in which we do also unwind this spaghetti mess of a diagram of a flow chart of how property taxes work in New Mexico. The key thing for you to take away today is at the top of the chart and the bottom of the chart is you, the New Mexico citizen and voter, who gets to vote the parties in power, the assessor, the treasurer, the county commissioners, all of those different roles. And they work through doing their job day to day. And at the end of this, you get to pay the property tax bill based on the decisions that they made. So let's talk about this as a brief history. Just in the last 18 months, we've seen a 65% increase in thousands of properties, commercial properties in Bernalillo County. And the range is anywhere from 87 to 192% in the top 40 categories of property. So we're talking just a massive increase for many people. Apartment investments that sold in 2024 experienced on average a 418% increase. And new multifamily development assessed values were coming in 200 to 500% higher than same developer, same property, often same neighborhood for new construction just a couple of years older than that, built in 2020 and 2023. And a new class of residential was created, labeled non-residential, short-term residential. Yes, I understand the irony of those words, which impacted over 1,700 residences in Bernalillo County, with a loss of classification and their 3% cap on increases, leading to an average increase of 65%. It's also interesting to note that the assessor tagged over 4,000 properties, but they did research and said they were able to roll back about 3,000 of those, leaving 1,000 or so. We saw more of that in the evidence rolls, but you'll see me cite this kind of over and over again. Before I zoom into the commercial, let me just tell you what happened in the apartment world. In 2000 and so 2000, early 2000s, the legislature put on a ballot initiative that asked the voters in New Mexico, would you like to see a cap on the increase of your property taxes? And for whatever crazy reason, 2/3 of us thought that sounded really cool. And we voted yes. And they used that initiative to what you now know today as the sales affidavit for single family residential and the 3% cap on increases. So we have skewed home ownership and how much you pay to your contribution to our community and society based on how long you've been in that property. And I could go in and tell you about the little old lady in Santa Fe they're trying to protect from the Hollywood crowd, which may or may not have been a real story, but it was certainly told around the Roundhouse a lot in the 2000s as the model of what they were trying to do. None of that matters. What you need to know is that for single family since 2002 going forward, what used to not be disclosed is now fully disclosed in what they call equitable disclosure, and that it only goes to the assessor's office. And they can choose to raise that value. And in fact, there's a flag in the CAMA computer assisted mass appraisal system where it will tell somebody, an appraiser, you probably ought to go research that and see if it's a deed or a sale. And if it is, let's go revalue that property. And what that revalue is in this last year is really important for single family. So for those of you who thought maybe I won't have anything on the agenda just for single family, I'll tell you they're moving in almost entirely to a cost replacement approach without depreciation. So if it's costing $300 for D.R. Horton to build houses today, and they have some of those sales in their database, when you go sell your house and you lose that 3% protection, that may very well be the value you get assessed at. And I'm grossly generalizing and stereotyping 260,000 parcels in this county. But again, it's all based on my experience. So how does this relate to multifamily? Well, at the time, the multifamily industry went to the title companies and said, we don't think we're residential. We're not going to give you that sales affidavit. It's an interesting story there as well. And then we were also going back to the assessor saying we're definitely residential. We want that 3% cap. And we threaded that needle as an apartment investment industry for the better part of 20 years. And what it meant was you had about a 1 in 2%, a 1 in 2 50% chance of an increase in your property tax assessment after the year of sale. And average, that increase was only 11%. Contrast that with where we are today at 418%. It makes you wish for the good old days. What I try to remind my clients is those good old days we got the benefit of for 2 decades, and now the check has come due, and it has come due when you happen to be an owner. And I say that because the assessor came in an office. He got guidance from property tax and revenue that was slightly different than guidance that they had seen before that said multifamily is residential and you shall be collecting the affidavits. And they aggressively went after the title companies in New Mexico and said, you will be collecting those. The industry fought back. We did this for about 18 months and realized the gig was really up and that those affidavits were going to be turned over. And in fact, there's a whole nother story about how that occurred, and I won't go to that today either, but I guess it's just a sign of my age. There's all these other stories that don't exactly relate to what you want to hear. What you want to hear as well. So for apartments, 418% increase. In Bernalillo County, you can see here the list of the top 28 or so property types and what their increases were. And the range that I gave you is for the general kind of properties out there. Radio and TV at the top of the list at 192%, working its way down to medical office and everything else. So, second only to short-term rentals, multifamily properties experienced the largest increase if you sold in 2024 or going forward as it relates to tax lightning with an average increase of 418%. I'm going to put an asterisk on that though and tell you what we don't know is how many people who own those properties protested this year and what their results were. In fact, some of the cases I handled, we're still waiting for a ruling from the formal hearing board, but not all of them protested, so that number is not going to move a whole lot. And then the current process we have has created, I think, a grossly unfair system in that duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes are assessed very close to what market is, and newer construction 100+ unit properties are not anywhere close. And we're talking like 75-80% of market value for the small units, 25 to 35% for the large units. So think about that. New construction, swimming pool, all the amenities, charging much higher rents than you are as a duplex owner, and they're paying 1/3 or 1/4 of what you are on a per unit. And part of the assessor's job was to try to bring all of this in alignment. Speaking of new construction, as it relates to apartments, it was often based on a very loose methodology that included the filed building permit values and just slightly higher than that on a per square foot in the assessor's database. So you have filed all your permits with the city planning department, and let's say they had up to $10 million, and that's a $200 a square foot, and the assessor in their computer system goes in and says, well, gosh, the highest assessment they have is 160. Why don't we say new constructions at $180 a foot? This is what the methodology was, just anecdotal for many, many decades. But starting, and so I could go in with a developer in tow and meet with the assessor and say, we're going to sell this in a couple of years, or assessor's office. We'd just like to see what your methodology is and how you arrive at value. And they were, well, you don't have an income and we're kind of at cost because it is cost. And let's just go look at the permit. And I could safely go to the next buyer of this property and say, here's how the assessor is viewing that. That really changed in 2024, and it changed dramatically. The developers I work with, the people who are building new housing in the middle of this housing shortage, are seeing construction values on an assessment level 2 to 5 times higher than the same property they built or a similar property they built just a couple of years ago. To put that in numbers for you, if you don't live in the apartment world like I do, that means some of those residents of some of those new properties, they're paying $250 or $350 a month of their rent just in property taxes. So think about that. You're renting a studio, the average rent's just over $1,000. You're paying $250 a unit. 25% of your rent is just going to property taxes. And yet the property built, a couple blocks down the street, a couple of years ago, they're paying $70 a rent in a month in of the rent and property taxes. It's a huge disparity and obviously a big problem. Although we had success in getting reductions in the initial assessed values, it's very much on a case-by-case strategic approach that's yielding results. And even that outcome is easily double what it would have been just a couple of years prior. Notice I'm very carefully not saying this new system's unfair or fair. I just understand we have a new sheriff, assessor in town, and he's a very smart gentleman, and I admire and respect him a great deal. He's also, an attorney by education and has experience writing legislation in the roundhouse early on when a lot of these bills were made, understands the law, I think, better than just about anybody, and is desperately trying to apply his interpretation of the law for this. And, not all the assessors before him were really doing that. What this means for apartment rental sales, investment sales going forward is we have been using a methodology of 85%. Used to use 61%. That was the average. If we were selling things at 100,000 a unit, the assessor a couple of years later had it in their database at 61 a unit. And I could tell most buyers this is, where the average ends up. Today, I think that number and going forward is going to be 79 to 85%. I'll kind of walk you through the math of how I got to 79%, but it's making a dramatic impact on overall values because if you sell apartment investments and an average cap rate is 6%, every dollar you get to the bottom line, which is your net operating income, that's $16 of value. So if you pay an extra $100 a month or $1,200 a year in property taxes, that's $20,000 in value you lost just like that. That's only $100, $1,200 a year. So you get the idea. As it relates to timing, if an investor bought a property in December 2025, when this recording and presentation is being made, and the affidavit of sales price was completed and sent to the assessor, due to their cyclical calendar of how they do things, they're not likely to pick up that sale in 2026. It's very likely they'll pick it up in time of 2027. Now, they will find it in 2026, but they actually need to find it in the first 3 or 4 months to get it in the computer, to send an appraiser out there, to get you a new notice of value that's moving really, really fast. And their head is in getting all of these other properties, the other 260,000 done. So it's not likely to show up until the notice of value till 2027. And because we pay property taxes in arrears in New Mexico, that means it actually won't show up in your property tax bill until halfway through, make sure I have this right, will not show up in your property tax bill to the second half of 2027 and the first half of 2028. And that's assuming you don't file a protest and get a reduction. So the math for this kind of works out like this. I've just kind of walked you through it. This is a fourplex. It sold for $425,000 this month, December 2025. Was assessed at $200,000. Statute says that computer can raise that by 3% a year. We're 6.1%. That's 3% compounding for 2 years. So it goes up to 206 in 2026. That's its assessed value. Assuming the mill levy stays the same, the tax bill goes from 2,800 to 2,884. If the owner, and then in 2027, the new notice of value comes out at 425. I rarely see those hit 100%. There's a paragraph in our textbook that you need to know, probably by heart. and cite if your value does go up to 100%, which basically just says the assessor cannot use an affidavit as evidence of sales and comparables unless they've got the comparable sales to support it. But let's assume this owner wasn't paying attention. Many people don't when they get their notice of value. It says not a bill and they throw it away and it gets the full assessment of 425. Well, that would be a bill of 4,417 because one half of that bill is what it was in 2026 and one half of it's what it's going to be in 2028, which is 5,950. In 2029 it'll be 5,950. The running average for the 5 years, because again you pay these in arrears, is $4,400 or 79% of what you paid. So using this 75 to 85% methodology, I think is a very reasonable approach. And if you like to underpromise and overdeliver like I do, then this is what I'm telling clients with the hopes that they go out and hire a consultant who will actually do a great job at getting that value lower than what they're currently looking at. So let's pivot now to short-term rentals. Single-family homes are valued using, for the most part, comparable sales of similar properties that did not experience, and it's not experienced major changes. But we are seeing county after county where these hearings, and I generally don't do houses. I have a philosophy on this, and I'll share it with you in just a minute. But we're seeing that in general, formal hearings, which are already slanted in favor of the assessor due to the presumption of correctness, I call this the Pope clause, which basically says the assessor is infallible unless you prove their information is incorrect. We're seeing formal hearings come back kind of anecdotally more and more in favor of the assessor. So know that when you go in and fight these cases, and we generally don't do single family for two reasons. One, I find as a percentage of what they sold for, they're often dramatically less than where they should be. And when you file a protest, you open the door for an increase. Second one is if I have 100 or some of my consultant, competitors have thousands of clients, they still only have one vote for the assessor. And if you go in as a homeowner, you get, and 1,000 of my clients do that. Well, that's 1,000 votes. It's 1,000 opportunities to make a voter happy and show them how diligent you're being and working on behalf of them. Whereas you do that for 1,000 of my clients, you still only get one vote. So this is not at all a cynical approach. I think it's a very pragmatic, realistic approach, as evidenced by the fact that the assessor's staff, starting the day notices of value go out, they're all sitting in the lobby waiting to help you out and see if they can just get your case resolved right away. So we rarely take on single family residential for that reason. The cases we do take on, we want to see a clear path of how we might win. We want to have a strategy and a vision or a approach to it that goes just beyond, not just including appraisal techniques, but, often other things than that. So related to that, while there has not been a change in the status of law for this property type, some of the assessor's offices have received guidance or direction from the Property Tax and Revenue Department to reclassify single-family properties that are used for short-term rentals. Unfortunately, this is a new regime of leaders who had a different interpretation of laws and an application of this on the properties and their use. And I mention that because you're going to see a little bit later, one of the current political officials who I think has really saved the day actually used to be the head of property tax and revenue as it related to property taxes a number of years ago and said, I have no interest in giving you guidance to do this. I don't think this is the correct approach. And I'll kind of read for you verbatim what his affidavit said. So my own personal opinion is that politics are very much persuasive in this novel approach to reclassifying homes as non-residential, which causes you to lose your mill levy. Commercial properties or non-residential have a higher mill levy, and it removes your 3% cap, could be permanently. So much so that if Bernalillo County's assessor had succeeded in their cases this year, it would add an additional $2 million in property tax revenue. For the balance of short-term rental information, please see the exhibits of what I've got, and I'm going to just kind of walk you through this. And note the punchline is in Bernalillo County, the treasurer corrected the tax rolls and rolled back the classifications and the values for everything the assessor had done this year. Even though we had hundreds of cases, maybe 100, I'm not sure, felt like hundreds of cases. I lived at the Bernalillo County building for many, many weeks, hour after hour, day after day, week after week, trying all of these cases. Those are just a backstop to the work that the Treasury did. So in our cases, part of our presentation was if you, the formal board, believe that these properties are no longer residential, you need to use non-residential techniques of value to appraise them, which is not a single family house. And that means a hotel. And if we look at the hotel stats, hotels are about 58% occupied and they are achieving, a revenue rate of, I think it was $168 a night with a 58% occupancy. It's an effective rental rate of just under $100 a night. We also shared with them the New Mexico short-term rental communities promotional material of how that business is impacting New Mexico, generates over $1 billion in revenue and $82 million in tax revenue, and creates over 17,000 jobs. I was very fortunate. I was able to assemble an all-star cast of characters and team to help us with these cases. Many of you know Ashley Strauss-Martin, who's been a tireless advocate as legal counsel for NMAR on this issue, and is really the person who kind of brought me around 180 degrees as to why this was such a problem. And then Meg Sandys, who's been an appraiser in our community for many decades and is a retired MAI, and myself. The three of us tried, if you will, these cases in front of the formal tax board a number of weeks ago. Kind of if I give you the bookends for this is how it looks like. In late last year, maybe early this year, the governor's office gave the New Mexico Short-Term Rental Association a letter that said each elected county assessor has the authority to value and classify properties. It's their job to maintain current and correct. If an owner disagrees, you have the ability to protest. The state of New Mexico, the office of the governor, and the property tax division have not advocated for change to the classification of short-term rentals. Pretty simple and succinct, right? But we, the industry, were working on getting some legislation passed. So we didn't have what happened this year. And that legislation would make it clear you're not to change that. Or if you are to change it, here's the guidelines, the guardrails, the rules of how that might work. And unfortunately, we were a little too late, and just through a series of things that happen when you're in the heat of battle or the fog of war or whatever you want to call it. The best that the industry is able to do was House Memorial 52, which basically said, assessors, please put this on the shelf. The governor will put together a task force. It's under the Economic Development Department. They will give us the report by the end of December, and we will use that for new legislation. By the way, if it's not totally clear, this is just one person's opinion and my perspective with the filter that I have. Where I want a very equitable and fair and predictable and transparent property tax process of all the things that I've seen that have flown through across my desk or my inbox this year, or the things we worked on. This is not representative of GAR, Southwest MLS, NMAR. I'll try to make that clear as we go along in the way. So as it relates to short-term rentals, the treasurer gave us an affidavit for our case, Bernalillo County. Keep in mind, Tim Eichenberg is a past deputy assessor. He's a past state treasurer. He's our current county treasurer. I'm pretty sure he's county treasurer before. He's a fellow realtor. He's been in this longer than I have, well over 40 years. He knows this stuff really well. In fact, I think Tim is probably will forget more than the rest of us will know about property taxes. And in his affidavit, he talks about when he was the property tax director from 2004 to 7, he issued guidance that this reclassification was not to happen. That's pretty powerful. That's a precedent of don't do this. He believed that it needed to be developed as legislation. Did I mention he used to be a state senator, so he knows the legislative process? And he's aware that the assessor has done this to many thousands of properties. He's also aware of the industry's House Memorial 52, which indicated the assessor should wait. And as his current role as treasurer and the authority he has under the state statutes, he has attempted to correct the tax rolls and move all those properties that were classified as commercial or non-residential back to residential and reset their values to what they were in 2024. And then he goes on to state in his press release that he did this a couple of weeks after we had our hearings. So if you know that, you would think this was game over, right? Well, not really. The assessor wrote a letter to the Cabinet Secretary Stephanie Clarke, head of taxation and revenue, and said, I'm actually concerned about what the treasurer did, and I'd like you to overturn it. And this document goes on for many, many pages. It includes screenshots of emails and other things like that. And kudos to Stephanie Clarke, who responded, Cabinet Secretary Clarke, who responded, no relation to me, responded very quickly and said, actually, I think, this is fine. I'm grossly paraphrasing what it is. The treasurer has performed their roles. And if you have any other, we're not going to step in and adjudicate this. And if you have any other questions, don't call me, call Ira Pearson at Tax and Revenue. So as we work through our cases, what we try to point out to the formal tax board is we think you have two directions to go. If you believe the assessors have the authority to reclassify properties unilaterally with no changes in law and a vague guidance, then they're non-residential. You should also believe those properties should be valued as non-residential. And if you don't, go ahead and reset them back. And just to demonstrate the chaos this has created, we created an infographic for them, if you will, a journey of what we have seen different assessors do in different places. 29 of the assessors chose to do nothing, as far as I can tell. They followed the recommendation for House Memorial 52. They're waiting for the governor's report at the end of this month and for the legislature to take action, either in the short session, if the governor puts it on her call sheet, or in the long session in 2027. In Taos County, they pointed out to us, we did protest up there. They pointed out to us their properties had always been non-residential, and that it was up to the owners to actually ask for a residential classification. Does say that in statute. It kind of boggled my mind that had never happened, since in most other counties, it naturally happens when the assessor's office goes out and they take a look at that property and they realize, oh yeah, people are living there and sleeping there at night. My hat's off to Isaiah, who is the assessor in Santa Fe. I've known Isaiah since he started first day in the assessor's office a couple of decades ago. Very sharp guy. And his office developed guidelines based on the definition of primary. And in his assessor's office, primary was more than half a year. So if you rented your Santa Fe property out for less than half a year and you could document that, you were good. You got it rolled back. You got your value reset. If you were basically using it for more than half a year, then you lost all of that and you could challenge him if you wanted to. Every one of my cases in Santa Fe were under 182 days and we were able to get resolved. So that takes us to the Bernalillo County Assessor's Office. And I am intentionally skipping the treasurer because I already told you what he did. He followed and actually cited House Memorial 52 as his reason to roll these values back, and is hopeful that new legislation, and don't take my word for it, reach out to Tim and ask him, but I do have his affidavit indicating what he was hoping for. So that leaves our assessor. And theirs is so complicated, I actually had to do a whole nother decision tree for that one. And it shows you in red that they, what the outcomes of each of these will be. And I want to thank the New Mexico Short-Term Rental Association for helping me put this together as well. So where we are now is that these cases have been tried by myself or individual owners or other tax consultants. And many of us have not received rulings yet on those cases. And the outcome of those rulings will really depend on, does the formal board believe it is residential or non-residential? And if it's non-residential, are they going to make us use residential sales, or can we use non-residential motel sales? And then there will be a value. And when we ran through that model of basically a one-unit motel, we were seeing the values come in at 30 or 40% of what the assessor's value was. So that'll be very interesting to see where that goes. If they believe they are residential, should not be reclassified, they'll get reset, which is effectively what's happened over here and what the treasurer did. And if they find entirely against the owners, you deserve to lose your classification. You deserve to have a commercial mill levy. You deserve to lose your 3% cap, and you deserve to be treated as a commercial property or a hotel, if you will, and you deserve that higher tax bill. Then there is no clear guidance as to how you get reset. You actually have to go protest or file a form. Now, when we did depositions of the Bernalillo County assessor, they said you could just send us a letter. But again, you could send them a letter anytime. I disagree with my value and I want you to hear me. There's only a certain window of time they have to do that. And it's not a well documented process for how you're going to get your 3% cap re-established. And if we lose in all venues and all places, that 3% cap is gone forever. So we're very much in a position of wait and see. I do want to thank the Treasurer's Office for doing what I believe is the correct thing. Again, just my opinion, which is giving us another year to get this legislation fixed. This could get challenged. The assessor's office could pursue this in other venues. I'm assuming this would be an appeal to, the higher level courts. and then the assessor and the treasurer will be battling it out. The problematic thing with that is my experience of these cases, property tax formal hearing rule. When you appeal a formal hearing at a property tax board, it goes straight to appellate court. And the last one we did about a decade ago took over 3 years to get heard. So this is not going to have an easy solution or a quick fix at all. In fact, the best solution may just come out of legislation. So going forward the next couple of years, it's going to be uncertain and harder to ascertain how to underwrite property tax values for the following reasons. 2026 is a short session, making it hard to develop a legislative solution. Ashley Strauss Martin is up today, in fact, earlier this morning, on behalf of NMAR, testifying to one of the committees as to the impact of what we've seen in the short-term rentals. Be curious to see how that goes. The assessor will need a couple of years to assemble a new data set of comparable sales of short-term rentals. And until then, they may continue to use single-family rentals. The irony of that is not lost upon me, that you're going to classify it non-residential but use residential sales. If you've heard me say it too much, I'm going to keep beating that drum. I just don't understand it. And any resolution that goes to legal venues could take 2 or 3 years to be heard. And what if they do find the assessor was right and all of these actions that were taken are incorrect? Are property owners going to get a bill for 1, 2, 3 years retroactively? It's just opens up a whole box of Pandora's, as my favorite Governor King used to say in his book. And in general, for non-residential properties, as the combined assessed values increase, the mill levy will decrease. In an ideal world, if all the commercial properties went up 400%, their mill levy would go down 400%, and everybody would get the same tax bill. But this is not an ideal world, and this is not how the numbers are working out. And as William Gibson used to say, the future is here. It's just being unevenly applied over each of the property types. So that leaves us with my call to action. What can we do? You can stay informed. One option is to sign up for our course. Its next course is January 14th. Be held on Zoom from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. It does include a 360-page PDF copy of our textbook. We also offer an 8-hour version where we actually do mock case studies and walk you through exactly what you would expect in your first formal tax hearing. You could donate money to your local real estate organization. If Josh Price is here, Josh, raise your hand. Or David Saavedra, they will gladly take your check as the industry continues to raise tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to make sure we have legislation that supports our private property rights. If you don't know who these folks are, email me or call me 505-440-TODD, and I'd be glad to point you in the right direction. There are real estate associations, trade associations, and political action committees that are very focused on this issue and have been for a number of years. Highly recommend you volunteer with your local board of realtors or other business trade associations and sit on their governing affairs committees. So NMARS, I was on for the last 2 years. We would meet sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 5 hours every Friday and go through every bill and talk about the pros and cons and take a vote and send our folks back into the room to see what they could do. And I know some of you are going to laugh this off, but as somebody who is feeling the feeble core pain of a constant dialogue that has polarized most of our residents who are ultimately our customers, that those of us in the industry are, very proud of our professionalism and proud of the relationships that we have with our customers. And it has become entirely polarized right now. And I desperately wish that we had somebody else who was sitting in that seat, not generating week after week new legislation to inflict pain on the real estate industry and apartment owners. I would sincerely ask, beg, I'll get down on one knee if you want, consider running for public office and seeing if we can do better and helping us write the corrective legislation that we need. That's everything I have for you today. I'm going to just leave it with this Q&A I've got here for you at the end. If you take this QR code, I'm going to double check it and make sure it works. You should take you to the 20-page summary of what I presented to you today. And as always, honor and pleasure to get to be here with you. And I appreciate your time and interest. And we now have about 20 minutes or so for questions and Q&A. Thank you so much.